Chapter 205, floor layering. We've got a ground bearing slab in this one. So we've got our earth, and then on top of the earth we have a well compacted hardcore. On top of that we've got some sand, and then on top of that we've got some insulation. Now the sand is there to make sure that this hardcore is blinded off so any sharp stones don't poke through. And that would normally be because we put the membrane on top of the sand and then lap that over to the wall. But in this case, I've put the insulation down instead. So this insulation is a phenolic type of insulation. We've even got foil back to it to give us an even better resistance level. And we've taken it up the side as well. Okay, so that's what we've got there. Then I've put my membrane on top of that, lapped it up and over, and then that also repeats down the other side. We'll see in a second. And then we've got these little spacers. So these little spacers are there to lift this mesh off the ground. It's important that this mesh has an element of cover, about 40 mil in this case, and then we can pour our concrete slab. So this sort of insulation forms the permanent shuttering for the slab. No need to shutter it otherwise. And we put obviously the usual expansion joints in if we needed to. And then we've got sand screed on top of that, and then we've got our finish on top of that. This would be self-leveling, and so it would give us a very nice finish. We could then polish it off afterwards, so we'd have sort of a concrete looking floor with a nice sheen to it. Now, in certain cases, we have the crawl space under the ground. Okay, now we haven't got a crawl space here because they're not really suitable, I guess, for colder climates unless you want to have a well-insulated crawl space. But basically you'll end up with a hole under the floor which could potentially fill with all sorts of things, cold air being one of them, maybe some moisture, maybe creatures could crawl in, or all sorts of things could happen in the crawl space. More storage space is the usual reason for having a crawl space under the ground, unless you just simply wanted to lift it off the floor because the area was prone to flooding. I don't know, but anyway, there's all sorts of reasons why you could have one, but in this case we haven't. Coming outside, we've just got our graded ground, we've got some more compacted gravel, and then we've poured a bit of concrete to create our sort of patio deck. A common thing in the US, not so much in the UK, is having this perimeter drain as well, this perforated drain, which is like a French drain which runs around, and so any water that comes down the wall gets into this and then runs away and sort of empties out into the ground. Okay, so that's pretty much what we've got. The main thing to consider with this floor is you work out where your threshold line is, the top of this wall really, and then you work down from it. Okay, you certainly don't want to step up onto the floor, or you don't want to step down onto the floor when you come through the door. You want this thing to be nice and level, so work back from this line. And in this case, because we've got quite a thin-ish floor finish, we've got some mesh running along there, which is going to hopefully prevent it from cracking at this point. All right, so that's a simple introduction to ground bearing slabs. Again, structural engineers would be on hand to advise on the thickness and the design of the concrete, and also whether we needed to support this via a different method of construction. But we're assuming the ground is of a good stable nature, and we can just use traditional methods. Okay, so the final bit that we need to look at, and it is quite important, after we've spent all that time insulating and building our walls to stop the water coming through, is then putting windows and doors in. These things can potentially cause all sorts of problems. Okay, so we'll cover that in the next one, and then we'll start building our beautiful detail.